So how do we classify organisms? There are two ways or two types of classification. Now, one is what we call the natural classification, which is based on natural relationships, considering internal and external features, okay, including biochemical processes, okay, the biochemistry and physiology. Remember, these are some of the branches of biology, if you remember. Biochemistry is about how chemical processes happen within the body at a chemical level. Okay, so in the body we have proteins, we have carbohydrates, we have minerals, we have nucleic acids, and even micronutrients. Okay, so how are these nutrients transformed in the body? That transformation, the chemical transformation of this, is looked at under biochemistry. Okay, and then physiology is about how the body works. Okay, so in natural classification, we look at how these organisms carry out these natural processes. Okay, so we look at the features that they have and how they carry out these processes. That is natural classification. And then artificial classification, what we can term as modern classification. This is based on what we see, okay, with practical evidence. So we say the rabbit has fur, the hen has feathers. That is what you see and what you have as the evidence for why you are not going to place them in the same group. The rabbit has fur and the hen has feathers. Okay, something like that. So that is artificial classification. So we have what we call the hierarchical classification units. Remember the example about the national ID. On your national identity card, you have the different levels of where you belong in terms of the country, in terms of the state, in terms of the county, and so on. And it's the same thing we do when we are classifying organisms. We move from one group, one level to the other until we reach the smallest unit, the smallest classification unit. So we start with the kingdom, the phyla or division, class, order, family, genus, and species. This order is supposed to be like that. You're not supposed to change it. Okay, you're not supposed to change it. So that's why it's important to remember this order. And we use the mnemonic kings play cards on flat green stool. Each word, each first letter here, the first letter of each word represents a particular level of classification. Okay, so this hierarchical classification units means levels of classification, or means biological classification levels, whatever you can call it. Okay, if we talk about levels of classification, this is what we mean. If we talk about classification levels, this is what we mean. Okay, so kings represent kingdom, and then P is phyla, C is class, and then O is order, F is family, and then G is genus, and then species is S here. So that mnemonic can help you remember that order, because that order is very important. So we are saying here that the kingdom is the largest taxonomic unit. We have more organisms in that level. But as you move down from the higher down, you have increasing similarities. Okay? Increasing similarities between the organisms. But the differences also decrease. Okay? So this is if you are to represent it here, we are saying as you move down more similarities. But also as we move down, less differences. Less differences. Okay, that's something that you need to note there. Okay, so we have 5 kingdoms, and we shall look at each of these. Monera, Prototista, we have the fungi, we have plantae, and then animalia. Okay, those are the 5 kingdoms. Okay, so the Monera, we basically talk about this one. You can skip those. So after the kingdom, we move to the phyla, or what you can call a phyla. Phyla is plural of phyla. Okay, so the kingdoms are divided into phyla, which are many. Okay, here. So a phylum, phylum is a group of related kingdoms with similar body plans or body structures. Here, you can use the word structures. Okay, and for example, in Animalia, we have a phyla chordata, but we have many phyla in Animalia, about nine phyla in Animalia. Okay, and then from the phyla we have classes. Still, these are also having more specific characteristics that they share. Okay, so within the chordata you can have the reptiles, mammalia, and things like that, and the chordata. Okay, and then we move to order. Still, other further similar characteristics. So as we go, we move. They share characteristics at a certain level, but at a certain level, they have some differences. Then you put them aside, like until you reach the species. Okay, until you reach the species, which is the smallest unit or the most specific organisms. So if we ask you what a species is that you can define a species as a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce a viable offspring. Okay? Organisms that can interbreed and produce a viable offspring. Organisms that can interbreed and produce viable offsprings are called, they belong to the same species. Okay, why is that so? You will learn that later on. It's because if we talk about viable or fertile species, this one you can use the word viable. It means that the organism will be able to have life and stay. Okay, it will not die whether immediately after fertilization or immediately after birth. It will be a live young one that will have life basically and it will live. Okay, but for example here, this you have a fish here, and then you have an elephant. When these mate, I don't know how they can even mate, or even if it is the bringing the semen, the gamete from both, and have them fertilized outside, still you will not have a young one that is viable. You will not have that. So they are not of the same species. They are not of the same species. That's very important to note. So our understanding of how organisms are what makes up these organisms has been increasing. Our knowledge about these organisms has been increasing, and in modern biology now, we look at the molecular makeup of these organisms and look at the composition of these molecules. So we are in position now to look at the makeup of organisms at a molecular or genetic level. Okay, so we are able to differentiate organisms based on what is in their genetic material. That is either the RNA or the DNA that you will look at in your subsequent topics in biology. So this is basically to tell you that we are no longer looking at these features on the surface and how they do things, and that is at physiology or physiology level, behavior level. We are able to look at the genetic makeup of these organisms and be able to classify them accordingly. Okay, so you can have viruses, but these viruses can be classified into different types of viruses based on whether they are RNA viruses or DNA viruses. RNA or DNA viruses, and you can know this if you do molecular analysis. So that is how far biology has gone. Thank you for listening to this presentation where we have looked at classification. We say that organisms are very many and we need to place them into different groups based on their characteristics or differences. Okay, we do this to promote order such that we can be able to group them in an organized way, so that we don't create confusion, so that what we call an elephant in one place remains an elephant throughout. Okay, so this classification is very, very important, and we have the classification based on characteristics that we see with our eyes, and then those that we can actually analyze using either microscope and other technological techniques to look at what molecules are there for us to classify them based on molecular structures. Thank you.